Hi everyone, my name is Kulvinder Kaur Dhew. I'm an artist, curator and educator, and I'm hosting tonight's artist presentations at Peters Valley, the Friday night presentations. We're happy to let you guys know that we have over 400 registrations for this event, the live stream. And for those of you from the future who are watching this on YouTube, welcome. Thank you so much to the staff at Peters Valley for giving me this opportunity to host. I'm looking forward to seeing all of the artists' work. And thank you to the artists who have generously donated their time to present their work. And to the audience, of course. It's nice to see you guys digitally. And last but not least, Lakota, the tech genius who makes all of this happen. Thank you for helping us through this. It's a steep learning curve. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first artist, Brittany Wittman McLaughlin. Hi, Brittany. So Brittany.
Hello, thank you.
Hi. Whitney approaches weaving through the lens of materiality. She teaches weaving as an art form and a way of healing, empowering artists to cultivate ideas with an openness to creative process and a sense of discovery through art making. In 1997, she earned a bachelor's in textile design from Philadelphia University and an MFA in sculpture from the University of the Arts. That was in 2004. She gained experience teaching at her alma mater, and in 2016, she created the Weaving Workshop, an online community and art journal where weavers share inspiration and motivation around the artistic process. Welcome, Brittany. Hi.
Hi, thank you. This is interesting, isn't it, to be here in this way, but I'm glad to be able to share my work with the Peters Valley community. When I was preparing my talk for tonight, I found my archive of notes and letters and photographs from my summer at Peters Valley. It was 1996, and it was the summer between my junior and senior year of college. I was 22 years old. In these documents, I found my letter of application that stated my primary goal was to surround myself in a place with people I can continue to learn from in the areas of weaving, artistic expression, and living life through art. I even went on in this letter to make a weaving metaphor about how my experiences at Peters Valley would weave into the structure of my life, making its overall structure stronger. I loved my summer there, and it no doubt helped me accomplish my goal of becoming a professional artist. Viewing my work over the past 25 years in the making, I recognize the importance of three recurring themes: spirit, history, and materials with symbolic meaning. In my archive, I also found a quote that I had handwritten on a piece of bright yellow paper, as if to say to myself, note to self, in 24 years, you will be asked to talk about your work. Tell them this. The quote is from a book titled Sacred Architecture, written by A.T. Mann, and it reads, "The spiritual is the active, dynamic aspect of the psyche, which is independent in forms and yet is an essence, which seeks expression in and through the world, always invested in forms. Those forms into which spiritual energy flow reflect a sense of the divine, and a science of such forms has developed throughout history, a science based on symbolism." So simply said, my work in its forms and symbols reflects a sense of the divine. This work is currently on view in the online exhibit at Peters Valley Gallery, Making Matters: Fresh Perspectives in Fine Craft. It's titled Piece Together, and it shows my affinity for natural materials, the delicate process of handwork, and small minimal gestures controlled at the loom. Each of the 7 scrolls was hand-woven and tea-stained and pieced together to create a form that is whole. This is a detail of a piece called Pulse that I created in 2019. This recent artwork captures my spirit engaged in my expressive weaving practice. The background warp, which is here, is screen printed with my thumbprint. This leaves my mark on the work as an integral part of the art, making the touch of the hand visible. The inlaid abstract imagery captures my pulse. This is a detail of a piece that I have recently finished in just earlier this year. It's called 1000 Narratives. The second element of importance in my work is history. The book has special significance in my work as well. Text and textiles are formed at the same root. Words are woven and interlaced. This is my silhouette in 1980. I'm 6. I can tell her 1,000 stories about her next 40 years. This piece uses the Theo-Mormon inlay technique of weaving with 2 warp systems. A black Sharpie marker outlined the silhouette, while black sewing thread filled the shadow. The mind is gold. She looks like my daughter. She could be anyone's daughter. I use the Victorian silhouette to acknowledge the history of women's right. She is me, and my art has been cathartic. Along the lines of historical documentation, the book is an art object and a way to capture knowledge. Archiving and documenting art history reoccurs in my work too. In this work called Subtext, I created edited versions of a book written and published in 1966 by Henrietta Buckminster titled Women Who Shaped History. The intention was to find a text that could be mediated to express the ideas of a diary using the words in a historical account of notable women in the USA. It is an approach to gain wisdom and knowledge. This book tells the story of 19th and 20th century women who were instrumental in attaining women's rights. Borrowing language from this previously published text, neutralized it for a contemporary interpretation. The women illustrated in the text contributed to the education of women, the suffragist movement, the civil rights movement, and the advancement of women in the medical profession. This mediated text exposes the layers of similarities of personality characteristics of these women. The common threads of their stories: they educate, they organize, and they empower. The universality of the book form is a methodology and commentary about the feminine experience, rather than a singular voice. The statements in this book transcend time, and the timeless text illustrates experiences and emotions of women. Although steeped in anonymity, autobiographical references are configured in this poetry of text, because all work means something beyond the material and speaks of its maker. This page reads, "She found her voice then. All her heart and spirit went into her words." The third element of importance in my art is using materials that are steeped in symbolic meaning. With both universal and individual themes of feminism, the materials used are selected by conscious choice to illustrate or evoke sensibility and emotion. This is the approach I teach in my weaving workshops, mindfulness and weaving. Recently, I started designing and publishing art books and workbooks. My first book, Tactile Sensibility, a weaving workbook, was based on my own art process that I learned from a variety of gifted teachers and mentors over the past 25 years. It takes you step by step through the basic weaving structures and provides inspiration to transform woven swatches into creative compositions. As we work through this process, students are introduced to the Buddhist philosophy of ground path fruition as a foundation for their artistic pursuits. As the exercises are completed, the process of creating beautiful weavings using each student's creative muse is demystified, while the approach to the loom can be transformed. I've offered this process over the years at in-person and online workshops. Here's an example of my work using this tactile sensibility process. Using a photograph as a starting point, it is interpreted into woven composition using both natural and synthetic materials. Using the tactile language of textiles, this artistic pursuit is purely creative. To engage in weaving is a practice of meditation and exploration of a variety of materials, textures, and colors. This piece was on view last summer at the Craft in America Center at the exhibit Material Meaning, A Living Legacy of Annie Albers. It actually was viewed and reviewed by Leah Ullman of the LA Times in her article, Long Live Annie Albers, LA Show Pays Homage to Overshadowed Bauhaus Artist. In it, she describes my work and says, Birch Bark Square is an acute tactile snapshot, an impression of one remarkable surface invoked in another. This piece, titled Web of Life, is the most recent work that I've completed. It's a mixed media on canvas, and I'm using hand-woven cloth as canvas. Using canvas creates new opportunities for me to make art at my loom. It has been said that my weavings and art represent nutrient cycles of ecosystems. My art is clean and contemporary with references to both minimalism and feminism interlaced. Art always tells a story, and I thank you for listening to mine. Should you have any more, any questions or would like more information about my work or the weaving workshop, this is the information where you can reach me. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Brittany. That was beautiful.
Thank you.
It's such a treasure to see your work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next presenter is Joe Guerriero. And Joe has been a professional photographer for more than 4 decades, serving clients such as Barnes & Noble, M&M's, M&M Mars, Zurich, North America, Poland Spring, and Samsung, amongst many others. His photography has appeared in many publications, including Sports Illustrated, Family Circle, and Photo District News. He has conducted projects in Pakistan, Turkey, Cuba, and China. An instructor at SCCC, Joe leads photography groups to Cuba, Bhutan, and Tuscany. Since 2010, Joe has made documentary films, including the award-winning feature Curtain of Water, about the US embargo of Cuba, which aired on PBS television and was screened at many colleges, universities, and organizations. Welcome, Joe.
Thank you. Thank you for that nice introduction, Kulvinder. Okay, so I share. So again, thank everyone for inviting me. Thank Kristen, Jen, and Rachel, Lakota, Brianne, Beth, and anyone else. So while I was thinking about presenting something, and since the workshop that I was planning to do was storytelling, photography, photo story, the biggest story, of course, we've all been dealing with is the pandemic and the protests for the past 4 months. So I decided to do something about that since I was as isolated and quarantined like everyone else. So fortunately, I happen to live in an area of New Jersey that is most beautiful, 40 minutes away from Peters Valley. I live on beautiful 6 acres here in Freedom, Northwest New Jersey, just a beautiful area. So as a photographer being quarantined, I wanted to be out there and photograph out in the streets, but of course it wasn't safe to do that. So what I did was photograph my property a little bit. And I expanded that with the road, the trail, and the town, which I'll tell you more about. So what I wanted to do was just go out. I mean, I didn't really know what I wanted to photograph. I didn't want to just photograph beautiful landscapes. I felt like I was looking for some kind of answers, being with the state of the situation. And I was looking for things, and I saw first went out there and I saw the shadows of the trees and the stream and the beautiful property. And I was trying to find myself in it, and there I was. It just kind of jumped out at me to shoot this picture first. Then as I went around property, I saw this tree, which I always loved and had photographed before. And it sort of is rooted into this shale. And I was looking for a way to photograph it. And as I tell students, you know, photographing landscapes, although landscapes is not my specialty, more like documentary, I do commercial work, but I tell students to find what it is that interests them in the photograph, whether it's a winding road, a fence, stairway, shadows, whatever, and let that guide you into what the photograph is going to be. So as I was photographing this, I managed to just see the way these creepy sort of roots and branches kind of just reached out of the texture of the shale and the leaves, and it just kind of spoke to me in that way. Just and I made them all sepia tone, just so they weren't normally black and white. So this just kind of spoke to me like that. It was a creepy time. Didn't know what I was looking for answers, and just going out there. Found this dead tree, dead pine tree. I spent a little bit of time photographing this in different ways. I kind of like this one because it's sort of, it had a very a raw and hard and sort of a pinchy kind of texture to it, and then almost like with bars, as almost like prison bars or something, you know, the way we were all kind of feeling being locked in our houses other than to go into the supermarket. So I just kind of, you know, hung around this tree for a while and let the light do whatever it did. And then on my way, after exploring my own property, I happen to live on a dead-end road. It's half a mile long dead-end road, and there's only about 6 houses on it. It's a beautiful road, and I'm lucky enough to see a lot of land, a lot of nature. And again, I was just looking for some things that just kind of stood out. And there's this pine forest there, and there's this one tree that just kind of jumped out at me. It had beautiful light on it, and it was the only tree that was sort of bent amongst all the straight pine trees. And I just thought it was a really interesting location. And then the pine forest itself was, it just kind of looked like a chorus. It's like a chorus of trees, and or they were sort of being led by these 2 trees in the foreground. It just kind of made sense to me, and the light again was just so beautiful, the way that it came into through the branches. It was still the end of winter, so there were really no leaves on the trees. There were mostly pines and fall trees left over. And down the road a little bit more, walking off the road, looking for things in the reeds and the little stream that came down, and this kind of jumped out at me. The light was just hitting these little flowers on the one side of this little stream, and just the shapes and the textures and the light, the reflection of the water. It was all just kind of peaceful to me. It's kind of a meditative thing. Then down a little ways more, the light was just hitting these reeds, and it was just so beautiful. The sharpness and the textures and the lighting, and I love this little foreground sort of silhouette of the reed there. Then I came upon this tree stump. I had never seen a tree stump like it before. It was really highly textured and white, and it had almost like had a kind of a face in it, black sort of areas. And I actually photographed this a couple of times because I loved it, and I was waiting for the light to be just perfect on it. And as I was shooting it, I noticed these 2 trees behind it. It was almost like making it sort of a majestic kind kind of look. You know, they just framed it perfectly. It sort of made it into a tree portrait. And then, lucky enough, I walked a half a mile down. I take a run on this trail down a half a mile from my house, the Polandskill Trail, beautiful trail. And I was looking for the same kinds of things, stretching out from my house. Like I said, we were all isolated, didn't go anywhere other than the ShopRite. So I saw this trail, I saw this light flare coming up, some hint of people, dogs. Even the trail sort of had a creepy, this branch on the left just sort of jumped out at me. It wasn't just a beautiful trail because it was not a beautiful time. It was a little bit creepy, a little bit of creepy time. Went down the trail a little bit more and saw these shadows playing on the rock cliff in the trail. I was just amazed by the shadows and the way the rock was. After all that, I decided to go into town when the protests started beginning. And there was the Black Lives Matter, and there was the Open New Jersey. So this was the Open New Jersey protests down in Newton Square. And this is really the kind of thing that I love to do, is documentary for photojournalism type of things. So I went down there and I saw the sign. And I said, wow, I couldn't believe that somebody was actually holding this sign. I mean, I could agree with the first half of it. I don't quite understand the rest of it. And the scene just sort of presented himself with these three women standing there with no masks, and the guy across the street walking by himself with a mask. It was just one of those serendipity things that he just appeared, and it just made its own statement. It spoke for itself. And then there were these guys who I actually spent a lot of time talking to these guys because I like to try to figure out what's going on and understand people. And it was quite something, quite something. This was another one, Open New Jersey Now. And the BLM protests. So after all this, I decided the safest place was to be back home. And that's where I ended up. And that's where I am. That's where I love. So that was my little journey for the pandemic and protests here in Northwest New Jersey. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Joe. Beautiful work. Such stories. Thank you. So our next presenter, I'm so honored to present Clare Murray Adams. She has a 25-year background and career as a contemporary quilt maker. She received her BFA from Kent State University and her MFA from Vermont College. She is the Professor Emeritus of Art and former chair of the Visual Art Department at Malone University in Canton, Ohio, where she taught fiber arts, fundamental courses, and printmaking. In 2005, she was awarded a month-long residency at Gentile, Wyoming, where she concentrated on encaustic, colograph printing, and mixed media. Clare currently teaches workshops in encaustic, mixed media collage, and colographic printmaking, and exhibits throughout the United States. Welcome, Clare.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm going to see if I can share my screen since I learned how to do that. And okay, am I on? Can you see that?
We're not seeing your screen as yet.
Okay, then I did something wrong.
Time.
Okay, share screen. Okay, there it is.
Thank you.
Okay, are we good?
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you. I want to thank everybody at Peters Valley for this opportunity to share my work, and I've enjoyed so much watching some of the other artists present their work and learning so much about their processes. So I'm primarily a mixed media collage artist, and I love using lots of different kinds of processes and materials in my work. I was scheduled to teach collagraph printing this week at Peters Valley, so the work here will reflect that process and how I incorporate other mixed media materials into the work. Let's see. So these two images are prints made from collagraph plates. So the one on the bottom right is made from the plate that I just showed previously. And to make a collagraph plate, you can glue a lot of low relief materials onto the plate, onto a mat board or a binder's board. This is then sealed with polyacrylic so that it can be inked, printed, washed, and then reused many times. I like to work with, like to print on fabric since I came from a background of quilt making, but I also use paper, of course. For Blue-Eyed Gardener, I printed the plate on 2 sheer pieces of silk organza in 2 shades of blue. This was shown at Peters Valley during the last year's gallery show. Using this as the base for the collage, I then added a chemical transfer of the face, then some direct printing where I just painted directly on the back of the leaves and then stamped them onto the organza. And then I used both machine and hand stitching in the work. Layering materials and stitching are important aspects of my work. This piece used that second handkerchief collagraph plate, and you saw that in the image that I showed before. It was the one that had the A in the corner. This work started by collaging the clock imagery onto the paper that had the writing on it. Then the handkerchief plate was inked and printed. Then the transfer of the face and the butterfly were done on a large piece of silk organza that was placed over top of the whole thing. I've done a lot of work with handkerchiefs which reference memory and history to me. This dress imagery is another constant in my work. This plate was made from a drawing that I did of a vintage dress that I found at a flea market. The torn edges around the dress create one kind of mark when you print it, and then the overlapping stitching catches the ink in a different way. The plate itself becomes a beautiful object as it picks up the patination from the inks that were used. And when I was teaching college, I always told my students that they should, if they were using printmaking in their senior show, that they should include the plates because they're just so beautiful to look at. Here is the dress printed on paper that incorporates dress pattern paper over top of it, the plain white paper. Let's see, where am I? The rectangle on the right became a place to add other information as my ideas for using this plate grew and changed. This is a quilt, so I still, while I don't do a lot of quilting anymore, I still go back to that as kind of a default kind of process for me. This piece is titled Orphanage, and it's made of 9 separate prints on washed canvas using a limited color palette. The red and black areas are sheer fabrics that were added over top. I was doing a lot of work at this time with vintage dresses. And so the orphans in this case are the dresses themselves as much as they are about the children of the mid-1950s and early 1900s who were often left homeless and sent to farms as child labor instead of to what they thought was going to be a caring home. So you can see in the rectangle areas on the right of each one of those pieces, that is where there's like little mementos or a key, perhaps a photograph, something that would individualize that orphan from another one. Sometimes I use other artworks that I have done as a jumping off point for making a collage or a collagraph print plate. So this was an acrylic painting I did as a challenge from an art group that I was involved in. We were asked to make something in a media that was uncomfortable for each of us to work in. I don't generally paint, just paint without incorporating collage or some other materials. So this was the piece I made for that. It's called All My Eggs, One Basket. It's also a format, the tall format is something that I don't always do. So here's the plate that I made on the left, and then there's a test print that I did on the right. You can see that the plate has picked up a lot of different colors from the inks that were used and some of the materials that were in the background of it. And for anybody who does a lot of printmaking, you know how many test prints and how many samples you have to do in order to get the wiping of the plate just right. Here are two more pieces from that series. One with yellow ochre, which is one of my favorite colors, and then the red one that's on the right. And I added that open circle at the top by drawing it in on the red one on the right. And then the other leaf, black leaf print on the top is from a discarded print that were parts that I didn't like, but there were still good parts in it. So that's where collaging comes in to changing the plate. I've used a nest imagery for a long time in my work as well. And so I had a nest collagraph plate that I've done a lot of different things with. And you can see here that the plate stays kind of constant, but it gets changed by the way that you add other things to it. Different ways, different things you add when you do the actual collagraph printing, or by adding mixed media like acrylic paint and collage elements like you see at the bottom, the one that's on the bottom right. When I teach collagraph printing, there's some time where we're waiting for things to dry and get ready to go. So I also do a little bit of mono printing. So in this this piece, the collage, it has a collage feel to it, even though it's not really a collagraph. The pieces of fabric were individually inked up and laid on a piece of plexiglass and then printed. And I was doing a lot of these in these pastel colors. And so when I was done, I added those two pink ones were actually some of the pieces that I had been printing from, and I collaged them onto this particular piece. Here's another one that was done in that same way by inking up the pieces of fabric and then printing them. But I added some colored pencil to those to heighten some of the colors that, to heighten certain areas of the piece. Much of what I do is collage using imagery and remnants from previous works. This provides a continuity to my work and allows me to further explore other ideas and concepts with the same materials. So I used the handkerchief plate again here that you saw at the very beginning with a clay piece that I had made. I photographed this little still life and then used the copies and prints in the following works. I don't know what that red mark is. That's all of a sudden on my PowerPoint. So this piece is called In Case I Forget, and it's about the aging process and the concern or fear that many, including myself, have about dementia or Alzheimer's. The collaged faces are either from the photograph in the previous slide or from other photos I have used for many years to reference myself. I feel that this piece has a fractured and used quality here that references both aging and uncertainty. These are details of two of the window frames that you saw in the last piece. The one on the left uses that A at the bottom that was on the one of the plates that I had made, and that A represents my Aunt Alice, who did suffer from Alzheimer's. This torso sculpture was made from canvas dipped in encaustic medium, and I have used it in for a number of years in a variety of ways. With the cavity in the chest, it can reference heart space, but depending on what you put inside that little box, it can also reference mind space. So this is another work about aging, and it was placed in a window frame similar to the one that I used for In Case I Forget. But this piece I made two-sided. It's titled Then and Now, 1955 and 2019. So this obviously is the now side, where I worked from the photographs of that sculptural torso. So when you look at the top left piece, you can see the question mark, which is kind of like, why did I go into the basement? What did I go down there to get? I don't remember. And then the piece in the middle bottom, I find that as I worked with some family members, taking a lot of different medicines becomes kind of an issue as we get older. So this is the other side, the then side, and it's about childhood. The pictures that I drew were of my granddaughter when she was 5. She's now 18 and at boot camp. So people change and grow up. And, but it's a much more playful and inquisitive piece, while the now side is more introspective. So I appreciate your attention, and thank you for having me, allowing me to share these images with you.
Thank you so much, Claire. That was beautiful. Thank you for your presentation.
Thanks. Oops, I'm trying to get out of this. Ugh.
And thank you again. Our next presenter is Mr. Robert F. Lyon. Robert received his MFA from the Tyler School of Art and is a distinguished professor emeritus from the University of South Carolina. His work has been featured in the at the Center for Art in Wood, Spiral One Gallery, Vero Beach Museum of Art, New Orleans Museum of Art, and the Columbia Museum of Art. He has been a resident at the Center for Art in Wood, Sculpture Space, the Kohler Company, and Banff Center for Arts and Creativity. He was awarded the 2014 Individual Fellowship in Craft from the South Carolina Arts Commission. Welcome, Robert.
Thank you, Kulvinder. Let me set up here. Okay, so tonight would have been the beginning of our class, Wood Shaping Techniques for Hand and Machine, and you'll see myself on the left and my co-instructor, Doug Finkel, on the right. And I think Doug is actually going to speak a little bit this evening about what our class would have entailed. And but one of the things that it would have entailed would be wood turning. And this is an old craft. Here is the earliest representation of wood turning found in an Egyptian tomb, depicting two men operating a lathe, one rotating the workpiece and the other holding the cutting tool. So this is where I live with my wife, Ann Hubbard, and in Columbia, South Carolina. And my studio is right back over here on the right-hand side. And if you walk out the back door of the house and head over to the studio, it's just a short distance away. But this gives you a little view of what the studio looks like on the interior. And one of my most used tools, I think, is the bench that I built just a few years ago. So this is a magnified view of what wood actually looks like. And Doug has got a great saying, which is wood is like a bundle of straws. And it really is. It gives off moisture and it takes in moisture, so wood is constantly moving. Now, I was originally trained as a ceramicist, and this is what some of my work used to look like. And so it's clay, but over a wooden armature. And some are, this is kind of person size, some were actually kind of large pieces. But I started, I thought I wanted to make some finials for those pieces. And so I bought a lathe and started to teach myself how to turn wood. And these are some of the early pieces that I made, and this is early 2000s, about 2002. And so these are buoys for the earth as opposed to buoys for water navigation. And these 3 markers of receptivity are actually about 8 feet in height. And so in 2009, I was invited to be a part of the International Turning Exchange, which is a 2-month residency for 5 people. And that year we had Leah Woods from New Hampshire and David Bender from New York State, myself, Jerome Blanc from Geneva, Switzerland, and Derek Bencomo from Hawaii. And so when I got to Philadelphia for this residency, I found a left-handed bowling ball, which I thought I would turn into a left-handed cup, which you see here. And this led me to thinking about turning other kinds of things. And I was at a conference and someone said, aren't we all vessels of information? And I thought, gee, I wonder if I could make a vessel of information. So here I'm gluing book pages together. On the upper right, you'll see stacks of these things stacked up, trying to dry. But after I made one piece that was 1.5 inches square, and after 3 months, 1/8 of an inch deep, it was still sopping wet. So I took this old chest freezer, drilled a hole in the top, put a 100-watt light bulb in the bottom, which held the interior temperature at 150 degrees and got a nice convection current coming out the top that you see is actually strong enough to raise this little piece of paper. And so these are some of the pieces that came from that. This is all turned book pages. Information tool. And while this isn't book pages, it is laminated blue jeans in tying tool. And so my early work with pencils, which you see here, originates from an interest in memory. My mom had died and she had suffered significant memory loss during her illness. And her dementia made me confront the fragility of our brain and how easily decades of recollections and thoughts can be erased. So working on paper and experimenting on the lathe, I began to realize that pencils, graphite, and erasers could make good visual metaphors for the way our brain works. A mark made with graphite is like our memory, easily smeared or erased, and perhaps never permanent. And these are inlaid woodless colored pencils and woodless black pencils. And so I thought I'd go ahead and make my own pencils. And so this is turned graphite, chunks of graphite that I put on the lathe and actually turned. These little vessels are made from ash and then coated in graphite and highlighted the grain with white liming wax. And so this is a piece where I was starting to think about this eraser idea and what happens to our memory. And so I thought, well, I'm going to go ahead and start gluing erasers together and putting them on the lathe. And so this is one of the pieces that I made, a plate of dreams. And these are all turned eraser vessels. This is eraser dreams. And I did a little collaboration with Jerome Blanc. He turned the wooden form, and then I fitted it with these pencil points on the interior of the form. And this led to a series of works that I did. This is Caged in My Thoughts. And some of my pieces play off my observations as a beekeeper, as the pencils in cross-section have been grouped together so they take on a honeycomb pattern. And the honeycomb is actually six-sided, just like the pencils I was using are. And so these are glued into the side of the vessel and then turned down. And this gives you a little idea of what those patterns actually look like. And so this is honeycomb vessel, about a little over 20 inches in height. Pollen band, where I was trying to imagine some of the colors that, or trying to visualize some of the colors that I saw inside the hive. Graphene. And in a piece like memory eraser vessels, I started experimenting with encasing, sawing, and splitting pencils in their erasers. So in works like interiors, the pencils echo patterns such as the vertical and cellular structure of the wood, along with abstracted patterns of the interiors of the pencils themselves. And these are tips of woodless colored pencils set in epoxy and into a piece of maple. This is segmented thinking. Lead works. Taking dictation. The unwritten word. And currently, I have a commission for an outdoor piece from 701 Contemporary Art here in Columbia, South Carolina. And this is for an outdoor sculpture walk that they're putting together, hopefully sometime next year. And so what I'm doing is I'm gluing together these pieces of cypress, putting them on the lathe and turning them off center so that they're actually, this is going to be in the end roughly about 9 feet in height. And so this has been keeping me busy during our quarantine and probably into next year. So this brings me to the end, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Robert. I love the granular nature of your work, and the presentation describes it beautifully. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure to see your work. Our next presenter is Mr. Douglas Finkel, who was, I believe, going to be teaching along with Robert. Douglas has been an artist and teacher for 25 years. His work can be found in numerous collections, including the Renwick Gallery at the Smithsonian, the Georgia Museum of Art, the Center for Art in Wood. Doug has taught woodworking and at middle school, high school, and as faculty at Virginia Commonwealth University. He has been a resident with the Wingate International Turning Exchange, which was organized by the Center for Art in Wood, and is a recipient of the Freeman Award for Teaching Excellence at St. Paul's School, Maryland, where he currently teaches woodworking. So welcome, Douglas. We're looking forward to seeing your work.
Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Let me see if I can, oh boy. Share screen. Oh boy. Can you guys see that?
We can see it.
We're good?
Yep.
Great. So, hi, everyone. I'm Doug Finkel. I'm speaking to you from Baltimore County, Maryland, Towson, just north of Baltimore. I've been woodworking for about 30 years. And so it's about 30 years ago, as you can see, my passion for wood began. And I include this photo on the right because this fold-out table I did for a mini little kitchen in apartment in New York, and that was the table that got me started in woodworking. It was this little furniture project that made me think, you know what, I should keep doing this. And so, as it was said, I went to Bucks County Community College and got my associates. I went to School for American Crafts at RIT, where I got my Master in Science for Teachers, and I became a teacher. And I've been teaching for 30 years. I've taught from young children all the way through adults. I absolutely love teaching, and I love teaching children. Particularly the chance to bring woodworking to children has been an absolute joy for me. Just leaving 10 years at St. Paul's School in Baltimore, and it's been a phenomenal experience. 3 areas of woodworking that I sort of have gone through in my career. This first is really furniture, and furniture is really the focus of these programs that I went through as a student. And you're really dealing with joinery, and you're dealing with kiln-dried lumber, design, and really technique. Later in my career, I discovered wood turning and carving, and that a much different part of the brain gets used. And I really took to turning and carving, and the sort of spontaneity that can come with that, as opposed to the sort of planning required for furniture. And turning kind of led me inevitably into green woodworking. Really working from fresh cut trees, working right from the log, where the knowledge of the material becomes so much more important. You really need to have an intimate understanding to kind of work in cooperation with the drying process. And this is something that Bob and I were going to talk about a good deal in our wood shaping class. So this is early student work. You can see I like these curvy forms. I had trouble drawing straight lines. I had some Japanese influence, I hope, comes through here. I do feel a little bit that this looks a bit like student work, a little bit trying just a little bit too hard on some of these. But I hope it gives you a good sense, because that sense of just kind of finding a line, finding a line and trying to resolve that line became an important part of my approach. And some later, you know, moving on to some later work here, experimenting with a leg form that I really like, this sort of Y shape, wishbone shape. Here it's one direction, here it's flipped upside down in the other direction. Here's another one. I quite like this table before I put the top on, but there it is. And as I go on with my work, I hope you notice that it becomes actually simpler. I tend to move towards simplicity, I think, as I've gotten on in my work. And by that I mean, look at the forms of these furniture pieces. They're really just these vertical slabs, vertical slab, and some sort of form, usually a curvilinear form, in between joining the slabs and making this cabinetry or making these benches. And I really love the simplicity of these. I'm really interested in these two curves and how they play off that bottom curve, sandwiched by these sort of heavier slabs on the side. And just keeping it simple and trying to find beauty and grace in just a relatively few lines. So in 1999, I started making these benches. I made this one right here, and it went into a show at Appalachian Center for the Craft. And long story short, it wound up in the Renwick Gallery of the Smithsonian. In fact, this bench is currently on permanent display at the Luce Foundation Center in the Smithsonian American Art Museum. That's a phenomenal thing to me that happened. It was out of left field. I've made about 43 of these benches over the course of the years. Probably still going to make more, and varying woods, varying textures, forms remain the same. These two on the bottom left were collaborations with some other wood turning artists. And so I mentioned that I went from furniture into wood turning. This is a little montage of the International Turning Exchange. So Bob spoke about this residency program. It's how I met Bob, through this program. And this was a residency sponsored by the Center for Art and Wood. And they would bring turners together and wood artists together from all over the world. And I got the job as shop facilitator. And so for 4 summers, I got the most fantastic job of being able to work with these phenomenal artists. And I learned a ton. Really changed my career. And I started doing these turnings, these sort of fun, silly creature things. I've always enjoyed creaturey things. And this was sort of early work and experimenting with the lathe, learning forms, playing with carving, and having fun with some of these eyeballs and these spiky guys. And that sort of led me into more carving and really my interest in spoons. And this is where it becomes more of this wood shaping. as per our class, and object making in wood, and taking single pieces of wood so there's no joinery. And I found I loved the process of making spoons. And again, these are sort of creature-like. I think maybe a little more sophisticated than the earlier ones, but sort of having fun with them still and playing with these forms. And again, as my early work, trying to find the graceful line and just trying to resolve my lines. So this is some more recent work. This is, again, having fun with some three-legged stools, these little milking stools. I've been doing these, and just again, the context, the contrast of forms between the legs and the seats, and having, again, playful with the fidget spinner. And I very much want to explore these a little bit further as I go on with my work. This is the most recent thing I've made. I've always been interested. I started getting into making Native American style flutes, and a friend of mine said, you know, they're limited in their musicality. How about we try a transverse flute? And so I started making this, and this, unfortunately, I've made this, and unfortunately I haven't been able to continue with this because the lockdown began, and I haven't had a lathe large enough to continue with this. But if ever there's a sense of simplicity in what I'm making, and that striving for simplicity, it's interesting to me how the flute is both the perfect combination of highly simple and yet highly complex. My arrow has stopped moving. I hope I'm still coming through. There it goes. Really, just the slightest variations in the shape of the mouthpiece, slightest variations in the holes, and you change pitch, you change sound quality. Again, I show this jig for drilling these because I want to speak again to the sort of low-tech approach. I love the low-tech approach. This could be much higher tech, and yet this is what appeals to me and gets my hands dirty, digging into the wood. So this flute I carry around with me everywhere, play it all the time. It's wonderful. So as Bob spoke, here we are splitting this piece of persimmon and thinking about our wood shaping class. Look at the persimmon. Can you see the cross grain in there? Tough wood to split. That's why I love this photo of the two of us wrestling with this piece. Persimmon is used for heads of golf clubs, and you can see why from that photo. So for the last 2.5 minutes that I have left, I'm going to take you through a quick demo that Bob and I might have done in our class on spoon carving. So my 7th and 8th grade classes went into lockdown a few months ago, and I was stuck with how to teach them. And so one of the things I did was go into my backyard and I made this video for them, or a whole bunch of videos, and I've taken stills from those. So here we go, let's make a spoon. There's a cedar tree that came down in my backyard about a year ago. I left it there thinking I might make something. We take a look at our cross section of the log, seeing where we're gonna split it. We got our wedge, we split it, and look at that beautiful grain in that cedar, nice and straight. It's gonna make a beautiful spoon. So next, we get our some references, right? We look at some spoons. These are some more traditional functional spoons that I've carved recently. We do some drawing, we explore design ideas, showing the boys how to do some drawing, showing you guys, and then came up with a fairly simple form, which is the top view of the spoon onto the flat of the wood blank. And we talk about top view versus side view. This was a demo I did for some class a few years ago, and I thought it showed well top view, side view, and I particularly like this dancing figure form, and spoons have always been very anthropomorphic, and so to me, and so I thought this showed it well. So now we take the hatchet and we start chopping away at creating our form. And there we have almost completed the top view. And here we are, top view complete. But what about this side view? So side view is drawn on, but I want to point out that the bottom here is very flat still. And why is that? And that's because the next step is to hollow out the bowl. So here we are hollowing out the bowl. And the things I want you to see here is I can clamp this down to my bench because, as you saw on the previous slide, this is flat on the bottom. I can clamp it down to the bench well. I can hollow out the bowl, and the sequence is so important. And here's a hook knife, a tool whose shape matches the shape you're trying to create. Japanese carving chisel, Scandinavian carving chisel. And this picture on the left shows how far I got with the hatchet, with the bowl already carved. And now refining with a carving knife. There's my Bodger's bib, which Bob and I would talk about in class. And there's finishing up the carving. And as you saw as I jumped, and there's the finished spoon. So this one's a little bit distorted. So that gives you some sense of the kind of demo we might have done in the class. And now you know everything there is to know about how to carve a spoon. All right. I want to thank you all very much. That's Bob and me. And on behalf of Bob and myself, thank you to Peters Valley. I'm so sorry we weren't able to come there and do this demonstration in person, but I'm sorry, teach our class in person. We certainly hope that we have the opportunity to get back there one day. So thank you, Peters Valley. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Douglas. That was wonderful. We also wish that you guys had been able to be here also. Our next presentation for tonight is Lucy Louise Derickson. She's an artist, a metalsmith, and educator residing in Washington, D.C. Currently, Lucy is a coordinator of the jewelry, metalsmithing, and crafts area at Montgomery College, Rockville, Maryland, and is a board member of Ethical Metalsmiths, where she works as a facilitator to EM students. Having received her BFA in jewelry, metalsmithing, along with a teaching certificate from the University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee, Lucy taught K2 art for 2 years, and then she went on to receive her MFA from Virginia Commonwealth University in the Department of Craft and Materials. Welcome, Lucy. Hi, Lucy.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes, you can. Hi.
Okay, very good. I was stuck on mute. All right, well, thank you so much for having me. Sorry, I just skipped ahead for a second. Thanks everybody who's online listening, and thanks for Peters Valley for giving me the opportunity to tell you about my work today. As you said, I'm currently the coordinator of the metals area at the Montgomery College in Rockville, Maryland. I live in DC. I did my undergraduate work at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee and did some teaching there in K-12 art education and realized that I was really excited to teach adults. And so I decided to go to VCU in Richmond, Virginia for my MFA. As you said, I am currently a board member of the nonprofit organization Ethical Metalsmiths, and I specifically work to facilitate the student-led projects. Ethical Metalsmiths' mission is to inspire responsible jewelry practices through education, connection, and action. We envision a world where a beautiful product does not bear a human or environmental toll. EM has worked to ensure that there are suppliers that work entirely in fair mined and recycled gold and silver, and is responsible for organizing and importing of the very first kilo of fair mined gold to the US in 2013. My work with EM started during graduate school at VCU when I started the student chapter of Ethical Metalsmiths. We created So Fresh and So Clean, which is an annual juried online student exhibition with an Emerging Artist Award. The show gives students an opportunity to see their work through the lens of sustainability, and then they also are rewarded for those efforts. The show is currently in its 7th cycle and continues to be juried by and designed by the students at VCU. I'm also excited to announce a new project I'm working on in collaboration with Wellness for Makers. We call it Critical Smiths. We are asking schools around the world to commit to a semester or a year-long research project. Our first group is from Queensland, Australia, and they have been researching flux. Flux is a substance we use in the metalsmithing world when we do soldering. Once it's complete, we hope to share their research with schools internationally. I wanted to mention EM and the work that I do with that organization because at this time, it sort of feels like it's my current body of work. At this moment, the time I spend on these kinds of projects has begun to surpass my time in the studio. But let's look at that work now. So moving to my studio work, I am inspired by the unusual connections we have to objects through the lens of the human experience, and specifically our human tendency to retreat to objects, allowing them to mediate experiences between people. I'm also very interested in how technology plays a role in that phenomenon. While I was curating this presentation for you, I could not help but think about my work through the lens of this pandemic, and so I chose work that I felt fit that theme. So this piece goes back to my undergraduate studies. I often created goblets for vessels that presented some sort of a challenge to the user. These vessels are bound together by 3 feet of latex tubing, reaching a total of 6 feet across. I used the latex cord to connect the vessels in order to force a group of people to interact, or at least not walk away until the vessel was empty. However, now I can't help but think about it as a way to keep people 6 feet away from each other. So moving ahead a couple years is the Surrogate Devices series. So Sherry Turkle writes, and has posed the question, what is it about modern community that has so taxed us that we sometimes prefer to reconstitute it through machines? So in the midst of a pandemic, I might answer this question a little bit differently than I would have in the past, but this next series was created while pondering this particular question. So my surrogate devices are designed to provoke memory by activating the senses. By engaging the olfactory system, this series strips away the need for the person and replaces their essence with a device. The Smell of Him 1987 through 2001, which is this piece, recreates the scent of my father as I remember it from this specific time period, which is a mix of cigarettes and the cough drops that he used to mask the evidence of that habit. When I imagine my dad, specifically from this time period, it would be the profile view of him at the wheel of his bright red work truck while I sat passenger. For the device to work, I need to have the smell of cigarettes. Since I'm not a smoker, I need to harvest this component by some other means, including finding the butts on the ground. You'll see the device is also equipped with a eucalyptus menthol Halls dispenser, a basket to hold the cough drop, and a container of water to allow it to steep for a short while. And this is what activates the smell. Once the cough drop and the cigarette butts are in place, the fan is turned on, and I can then sit and smell the mixture of the two. The Best Smell 1986 through 1992 also emits one of my most potent smell associations. This piece stores and expels the smell of laundry. It contains the vintage dryer sheets that my mother used when I was young enough to be delighted to find these mysterious and scented foam squares that were often hidden in my clean clothes. Upon finding the treasures, I would store them in a secret place where I would often return for another whiff. Over time, the smell would fade and I would patiently wait for the next one to show up. So those last two devices are physical stand-ins for two people I love dearly, my mother and my father. In these objects, I find comfort. These smell associations transport me immediately and vividly back in time. When I think about them in the context of this pandemic, these devices now give me the opportunity to visit someone in a way that uses multiple senses without the use of a device that has a screen. Moving on to devices for a first date. Again, Sherry Turkle writes, we look to technology for ways to be in a relationship and protect ourselves from them at the same time. I can't help but agree with Sherry Turkle on this one. I mean, I did just show you how I turned my parents into objects, right? So again, when considering a pandemic, this statement I think holds true, but certainly takes on additional weight. It feels more mandatory now for us to be leaning on technology rather than impulsive, which is how I would have interpreted it previously. Each device in this series acts as a barrier between people who are attempting to get to know each other better through subtle physical contact. The absurd nature of these devices asks the viewer to consider how interactions such as these might become what we prefer from interpersonal interaction. The objects fill spaces in between, exposing our vulnerabilities as they protect us from one another. They prevent people from experiencing one another through that subtle physical contact or other sensory experiences, such as becoming acquainted with the uniqueness of someone's odor. I question how our growing need to edit, streamline, and remove vulnerability from communication will affect our ability to empathize with our conversational partners. It is through our mistakes and errors that we learn. And if we strive for the most efficient or comfortable way to communicate, will we be missing out? And that question brings me to the final series that I'll discuss today, which is, I look forward to seeing you again, or for the first time. So on March 1st, 2015, I printed out the list of everyone I was friends with on the social media network Facebook. I proceeded to make a small palm-sized pewter vessel for each person listed, and with the intention of one day placing it in their hand, replacing the device that's usually in their hand. There are over 600 vessels in the collection. So the project is a situational device I've designed to help me, or rather force me, to step outside of my comfort zone and practice social interaction. And I'm asking my social network to help me. Social media has become the perfect vice for me to stay connected with the people in my life, but from the comfort of my own home. I can obsess over work and school, all while I still feel involved and validated and supported, and also challenged by my online network. I can half-heartedly maintain friendships in Wisconsin, where I'm from, while I put little energy into making new friends in my new home of DC. Each vessel is stamped with the name of each friend, their first initial, and the full last name as it was listed on their Facebook profile the day I printed the list. I have begun handing them out to my Facebook friends as I've seen them in person, which is about 150 so far. Last spring, I was able to exhibit the work as part of a visiting artist series at UW Milwaukee. I gave away about 100 or so at that time and saw people for the first time in over 15 years. Before the vessel is sealed, a message is placed inside of it. I have kept all the details about that message a secret from everyone. The message inside represents the curated nature of social media. But when my friends come to pick up their gift, we have an unscripted conversation. So this object is now connected to this moment in time where we were together. So to receive that scripted message, they will have to destroy the object. And so lastly, each of the shelves has a unique QR code on it, which is revealed when that vessel is removed. This way, people who come to the gallery can find out where the missing vessel went and what it looked like. I have a lot of feelings about this project. It both surprises me and it also totally scares me all the time. But there seems to be endless items to unpack as time goes on with this project. But I will leave it there. So thank you again for listening to my talk.
Thank you so much, Lucy. I love your deep dive into tech and senses. It's stunning. Thank you so much. And that concludes our program for tonight. Thank you to all the instructors for their presentations, and thank you to the audience for joining us. I know there are folks who have joined us from all corners of the world, and specifically hi to one of our past assistants, Laura Dortmans, who's watching from somewhere outside of Melbourne, Australia. So thank you again for joining us. This is wonderful. We will get through this and we'll see you guys on the other side. Stay healthy and keep making, and have a wonderful weekend. Thank you. Bye-bye.